Welcome to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast, which shares the stories, insights and people involved in the Scottish red meat sector. In this series, we will speak to farmers, vets, advisors, processors, researchers, hauliers, marts, butchers and retailers, as well as to the fabulous team at Quality Meat Scotland. I'm your host, Jane Craigie, and I'm looking forward to telling the stories that matter about the iconic quality livestock of Scotland and the people that produce, process and retail Scotch beef, Scotch lamb and specially selected pork. In this episode, I speak to Wayne Godfrey, Chief Executive of Brown Brothers, about their vision to add 100 million to retail sales of specially selected pork via the family's investment in the Brechin processing facility, as well as the branding work and product innovation that they are undergoing. I also caught up with Iain Macdonald, QMS's Market Intelligence Manager, who talks about the beef, sheep and lamb markets and the outlook for demand and supply. And ahead of starting lambing, Kate Rowell gave me a fabulous roundup of the industry engagement she has been involved with over recent months, and the recent news of the approval of the QMS levy increase, the first time in close to a decade and a half since it was increased last.
Yeah, so it's the first time since 2010 actually that the levy has changed, and we didn't have any need to do it up until this point. We have managed to make cost savings. Obviously inflation hasn't been that high, so the money that we've been getting in has still been doing pretty much the same work that it always has done. And then a few years ago we did get levy repatriation back from the English levy that's collected down there for animals that are slaughtered down south. So all those things have meant that we've been able to hold the levy stable at a steady rate since 2010. But just with the things that have been happening in the past couple of years with inflation, and also with the fact that we've got our new 5-year strategy, which is due to start on the 1st of April this year, we decided as a board that it would be good to hold that levy spending power. That's what we've gone out to do. We just wanted to protect the spending power of what we have. We didn't want to start, for example, a 5-year project this year with a budget of £10,000, for example, which then, because inflation is eaten into it, in 5 years' time, it's only worth, say, 8.5 or something, and we can't finish the project properly. So really that was our intention, was to protect that real spending power of the levy for the next 5 years. So the Cabinet Secretary has agreed that for next year the levy will go up the same as the rate of inflation, which I think works out about 6.8%.
I attended one of your events and your online events over the winter workshop period. The one I attended was at Thainston, and there was some really positive discussion about what you're delivering, from education, health, through to supporting the industry and in its widest sense through to processors. How did you think those workshops went? What was surprising about them and what gave you good heart?
In general, they were all very positive. I mean, it was really important to get out there. We decided as a board, again, to get out there and actually speak to people and listen to what they were saying. We didn't want to do a series of online workshops where people maybe felt that they didn't get a chance to say anything. We tried to get as far around the country as we could. And I know that is not always easy. We've not been everywhere. For example, we didn't manage to get up to Shetland. We didn't manage to get out to the Western Isles, but we tried to cover as much sort of geographical area of Scotland as we could. So everywhere from Campbelltown in the very far southwest up to Orkney, from east to west, Oban, right over to Lauder and Forfar. So we tried to get round about so that everybody could have a chance to come. I mean, I know it's only one date. There was a lot of, times people said, I just can't make that date. But we did do an online event at the very end to try and catch anybody that couldn't make it. So it was a really comprehensive piece of work. It took us quite a few weeks to get round about, and the board were also quite keen to be involved as well. So each workshop was chaired by a board member so that they could get out and speak to people as well. And as I say, it was really positive feedback. We were able to explain the sort of things that we were hoping to do with the money, explain about our new 5-year strategy. And people in general realise that you do have to invest in marketing particularly, but in all the other reputation building and market development work that we do. People do understand that, and while nobody's out there, shouting for a levy increase, the vast majority of people absolutely understood why it was necessary, and they were quite in agreement with it. In fact, of all the people that came to the workshops, I think it was something like 93% who agreed that they were happy with this levy linked to inflation.
And looking ahead, Kate, to your 5-year strategy, just talk us through what that comprises of and how you'll spend, your budget going forward.
So if you've got about 3 hours, I can talk you through the whole thing. But the headline really of our strategy is to try and make Scotland the place for premium red meat. We're not a commodity producer. We're a tiny player when you come to the global meat trade. We have a premium product that's very high quality and is really, really valued, both at home but especially internationally. So one of the big things that we'd like to try and do is develop markets even further. We've had a really big win recently in Scotland where one of the processors has got their international halal lamb accreditation. So they're able to then export halal lamb. It's stunned halal lamb. You're not allowed to not stun in Scotland. So they are at the very start of a journey to try and build a market there. And they're particularly targeting the Middle East. You know, that's where the majority of lamb consumption is, or growing lamb consumption is, and there's a lot of money out there. So that's one of the places that we really are targeting, and Tom from our team has been out at Gulf Foods just recently to try and get that market started. We're right at the very beginning of this process. It's not going to happen overnight, but we need to keep working to build those markets, as well as other places, you know, Japan, Canada, and the EU as well. So one of the things we're trying to do, particularly in Europe, is relaunch our Scotch Beef Club, which is the club that we have which is aimed at food service. We've just recently had a launch in a top restaurant in Milan where we worked with one of our processors to invite a lot of chefs and butchers and others from food service to a restaurant in Milan and show them exactly how good Scotch beef and Scotch lamb are for them to serve in their restaurants and in their butcher shops. So again, that's another thing that's the very first one we're doing, but we're going to have those events right across Europe and right across the UK to try and increase the exposure of the Scotch Beef Club so that as many people as possible know about it. So that's just two of the things we're doing in the sort of market development area. The brands are always being worked on. We're hoping to win hearts and minds of as many UK meat eaters as we can. Particularly, I think we're going back slightly to the older age groups. We have been targeting younger age groups. We really identified a few years ago that they were the ones that we really needed to target, but we have moved back slightly to older meat eaters. They're not becoming vegetarian in general, but a lot of them are cutting down slightly on the red meat that they eat. So we are retargeting them again, just to make sure that we keep them in the category and make sure they understand how good red meat is for their health.
And Kate, a lot of what you do is also I won't call it lobbying because it isn't lobbying, but it's influence at a very senior political level. I know there was a Scotland office reception that you went to and you do meet regularly with MPs. Just give us a flavour of what that work is and how influential you think it is making that time to do that.
So yeah, we meet regularly with MSPs. I'm going down to London tomorrow actually to meet with some MPs. And as you say, we don't lobby, but we do have a lot of facts at our fingertips. So particularly with the MPs down in Westminster, the messages that we're going to give them tomorrow is about the economic benefits to Scotland of the red meat sector. We have quite a lot of work. We have economic impact reports that are pulled together every year. We have other pieces of work which they're absolutely straight down the line where we are an NDPB. We've got to take the facts and present them as they are. But what they do show is how important the red meat sector is, not just to agriculture, but to the wider economy. So it's getting those messages across that's really, really important so that the MPs down in Westminster in particular know how big a factor it is in Scotland, because that's not the same picture as it might be in England or Wales or Northern Ireland, you know. So we need to make sure that they understand how Scotland is different. We also work very closely up here with MSPs, and it's really important that we do that alongside all the other organisations. You know, there are lobby groups up here who lobby. What we can do is present the facts behind some of the things that they're asking about. So if NFUS, for example, are going in there to try and point out different things to do with policy and different things to do with support, we can provide the facts that show what that support and what those policy changes might do or how they would affect the sector up here in Scotland. So really, really important, and we just all need to keep talking to them, because MPs and MSPs and even councillors, they don't necessarily know about farming, they don't know about agriculture, they don't know about the red meat sector. So we've got to make sure that we give them all the facts and they can understand it properly before they make decisions.
Thanks very much to Kate. I'm hoping that her lambing went well. Coming up next is Iain Macdonald, who, after 12 years working for QMS in marketing intelligence, is the best person that I know to talk about the market movements in Scotland's 3 proteins, pork, lamb and beef. I ask him about what's going on and what's going to happen, especially to lamb sales post-Ramadan, why there's such a big price difference between our lamb price and that of New Zealand and Australia, and what's ahead for beef prices.
Really, since the start of the year, we've just seen a little bit of upwards price pressure. Prices still holding latest week about 3% higher than last year. Prices haven't moved forward quite as fast as last year, but in most years it's been a sort of downward trend at the start of the year, so we're still well ahead of the 5-year average, maybe 27% ahead of the 5-year average. So yeah, it's almost a kind of unusually firm start to the year. Often you get a decline, but we've seen a slight uplift, which suggests that the processors are competing hard for cattle. There's the demand out there because the sort of abattoir volumes are holding up above the sort of annual average level at this time of year. So yeah, there's a lot of cattle out there and the processors are paying for it. So yeah, strong start to the year for beef. Moving on to the sheep sector, I guess an even stronger year. So with beef prices, we're slightly below the highest ever, but with lamb, we're sort of certainly for a period outside of the start of the new season, we've seen real huge price increases at the start of this year, upwards of 40-50% on last year, really driven by the Islamic festival at the moment, Ramadan, the festival at the start of that, but elevated demand right the way through that month of Ramadan. And then we've obviously got Easter coming up as well. So that's really driving the trade, domestic demand, export demand as well from that. And actually the domestic retail sales have been pretty good through the winter. So yeah, demand for lamb has been good. Less lambs on the ground this year. So that's also supporting prices from the supply side. Moving on to pigs. So last year we saw a real strong price uplift, or really it was 22, second half of 22 into 23, really strong price uplift. Over the last year, things have settled down and the market sort of returned to a more normal pattern. We've seen a bit of a dip at the start of the year, but prices now seem to be stabilising and similar to where they were last year, still well above the 5-year average. 35-40% above the 5-year average, so relatively firm market as well. So that's really the consistent across all three species, firm farm gate prices.
And Iain, in terms of stores, so store lambs, store cattle, what have you seen over recent months? And again, what do you anticipate going forward?
Yeah, so with the finished price being in a strong position for the farmers and with numbers looking relatively tight with a smaller calf crop last year, that's upward momentum into the store price. I guess with feed costs being much lower than they were last winter, that also helps drive the competition for those stores. The finishers think there's a chance of making a margin this year. So that certainly supported prices. It's certainly a different place to where we've been the last couple of years. On the sheep side, the store hog prices has also rebalanced significantly higher in the last couple of months, just to fit with that finished trade and the confidence out there.
And do you think that beef finishing prices are going to keep up with that store price that we're seeing?
So if you look over a long period of time, there's generally been, for the sort of 6 to 12 months, stores just over about 60% of the finished carcass value, and then close to 70% for those yearlings being sold at 12 to 18 months. And I guess just looking at those historical relationships, the store price is relatively firm at the moment, I would say. That doesn't necessarily mean that the finished price will rebalance, because if you reflect on where production costs are, for example, 2 years ago, when input costs were at their peak, the relationship meant that the sort of store price was relatively low. I guess just less competition at that time because of pressure on finishers to make a margin. So yeah, you can't always say, oh, if the store price is this, then the finished price is going to hit this level. But I would guess I can say that at the moment the store price is relatively firm compared to where the finished price level is. And people can read into that whatever they would like to.
Exactly, you can just interpret that as you wish. And in terms of lamb price, you touched on Eid, Ramadan and also Easter. We do see an upturn in demand and price during those religious festivals. What will the price crash, do you think, after the festivals are over? Or do you think it will remain fairly buoyant?
My view on the lamb market is it's going to stay relatively firm. You can always get from day to day, sometimes even you can get huge volatility in pricing, but the way things have been this season with a smaller lamb crop last year, significantly smaller, roughly 5% across Britain, and auction volumes, abattoir throughputs appear to have held up, down a little bit, but not down to the extent that the lamb crop fell, which suggests that things are expected to remain pretty tight through the spring. So in theory, that should support prices going forward. I guess with that extra demand for the festivals, that demand level might drop off a little bit, but the sort of market data, comparing market data and census results, suggest that the lambs aren't going to be there in the next couple of months. Yeah, potential for prices to stay firm moving into the next season.
Great, because, it reflects a demand for red meat, which is what we all want to see, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if you'd asked me 5 years ago, beef price was in a difficult place for the producers. I think the average price in 23 was 40% higher than it was in 2019. And I guess that does reflect that demand for red meat has remained strong through COVID, possibly made people think about diets and what they really value and this quality of product and nutrients, all those kind of things. But yeah, so 5 years ago, we would have been thinking that demand for meat would be dropping and there was potential for meat alternatives to rise, but that's really not happened. And those alternatives have kind of fallen away. And I think I was recently reading this industry crisis meetings in that sector, just because demand for red meat protein has held up really, and they've been struggling.
No, it's really good to see. And looking ahead to livestock numbers, what do the January cattle population data sets tell us, do you think?
So in terms of the sort of finishing cattle in Scotland, it looked like in theory there are a couple of percent more prime cattle on Scottish farms than at the start of 23. So in theory, yeah, availability is firm. However, slaughter has been a little bit lower than last year. Whether that's because a slightly smaller proportion of the herd are being processed or cross-border movements, there's a few variables in there, but certainly the availability level is firm. That, again, rising cattle prices at this time suggests that demand is out there for those cattle. As the sort of reduced calf crop that we got in spring and summer last year starts to come through the system into the second half of this year, then things could tighten up a little bit on the availability front. However, it really does depend on what level the herd is. If there is going to be a move towards retaining heifers, then that might be a variable as well to take into account. But yeah, I think my view is that, yeah, we should be a little bit tighter in the autumn than autumn 23.
That's really interesting. And in terms of price, Ian, I'm thinking now about lamb, where the imports from Australia and New Zealand are always a concern to the industry. Why are their prices so different to those of our own?
Yeah, that's really been quite an interesting thing to observe in the last year. There's really been huge price divergence with the southern hemisphere. New Zealand prices are struggling to reach £3 a kilo deadweight converted into our currency, whereas recent sort of auction prices and the deadweight prices in Britain converting to 7, I think possibly even pushing above £8 a kilo deadweight if working on a conversion rate. So that's, yeah, massive difference in price. In New Zealand and Australia, some of it is driven by increased production. So Australia, they have had a huge, sheep cycle with drought and followed by better ground conditions and rebuilding. And so they're really at that top of the production cycle this year with huge increase in output, and that's pressured the farm gate prices. New Zealand, they're kind of operating in a similar market. So that's, I guess, pressured their price. And the Chinese market has been weak and that's been their sort of major market that they've been targeting recently. So yeah, I guess it's that well-supplied position in the Southern Hemisphere.
Here's what Wayne had to say about Browns, their growth from a single butcher's shop in Biggar to a multi-site, multi-million-pound business, to one that plans to significantly expand demand for quality pork products from Scotland's farms. Wayne, it is so good to meet you, and I hope your head's all right after last night. I know you were at an event.
Yes, but I was well behaved knowing that I had this morning, so that's okay.
Good. Well, it's a big month for you, isn't it? You've got a lot going on as a business, as you always have.
Yes, we've obviously got the exciting progress of the extension all getting finished at Kirkconnell at the moment and bedding in our recent acquisitions on the Scottish pork side.
Well, I'm going to take you back. Your origins as a business were as a butcher shop in Biggar. Take us through that history of how the business has developed to a multi-million, multi-site business throughout Scotland.
I think the inspirational side comes from our father, who had that entrepreneurial ability to pass down to the 5 children that are all in the business now. And we literally took a butcher's shop, started to see the added value side, and as the added value side started to grow, we pushed through and grew the operational side with it. And along the journey of that, we were very fortunate that we made some acquisitional purchases that helped the growth as it progressed, really. So we were circa a £1 million retail operation with another $1 million on hotel and catering, which then when we moved to Kirkconnell, we then took that over a decade up to circa 20 million. From the 20 million that we then had, we then decided to go on the bigger acquisition trail, Brown Brothers was always the heart of that, but it enabled us to look at other acquisitions and bolt-ons. And Brown Brothers is still the heart of it, because that employs now 650 people, which in turn is turning over just circa about 100 million in its own right. So although we went on the acquisition trail, the true heart and growth of the business is still at Brown Brothers, which is a site at Kirkconnell having its new extension built.
And Wayne, why pork?
I think pork is an underrated meat protein. If you ask a consumer, have they had pork? 50-60% of people will say, no, I haven't had pork this week. But then when you actually dig a little bit deeper and you say, have you had sausages, have you had a bacon sandwich, have you had a ham sandwich, have you had a ham wrap? Oh yeah, I've had all of them this week. So all of a sudden they open up and they realise that pork consumption actually in volume terms is a huge part of our weekly diet. And we have added value to that. So with the growth of convenience, well, my father saw it really, but as a family we've then embraced that, and that convenience of pork does allow itself well to be consumed on the food to go side and all the products that we want on a daily basis.
And Wayne, the pig sector has been through a really, really tough time, and probably the pinnacle of that was the pandemic that became very, very difficult. Yet you invested in Brechin. Why did you do that, and how has it panned out for you?
Well, firstly, it certainly hasn't panned out by any stretch yet. We're 2 years in and we've got a little bit of work still to do. Going back a decade, really, Brown Brothers have always wanted to get more control on the raw material of Scottish produce. We've always been having to buy our Scottish production from other competitors. So the ability to buy Brechin was just a dream come true really 2 years ago, because we've been working on it for 10 years. So although we bought it at possibly the worst time the pig industry had ever faced, and as you know, the meeting we had yesterday was with pork farmers, and in turn they were in very difficult times, worst times that we've ever had. But I think it is an industry that has these roller coasters. We're trying to talk to them more about a progressive route where we don't have the peaks and troughs like we used to. We're going to try and iron a little bit of that out and try and give them a more secure line to the retail industry. And if we can create that, I think we will see less fluctuation and more stability in the Scottish pork industry.
And how are Scottish pig farmers feeling, with that direct relationship that you've built through Brechin? You'll have a real sense for how they're feeling at the moment. What do you think the mood is?
I think the mood's very upbeat, but they've still got a little bit of reluctancy. Since Browns have come into the industry, we've only really seen a betterment for them, and we haven't seen a downturn in the industry. So their slight reluctancy or resistance at the moment is, how do we deal with it when there is a bit of a downturn again? But as I keep speaking to them, and what we set off to do was, if we can find a Scottish marketplace for the Scottish pork, then I don't think we will see the peaks and troughs that they've experienced in the past. And we have such a loyal people in Scotland. They love to buy Scottish produce, and they haven't had that ability to have that marketplace fulfilled with product produced in Scotland.
It's such a good news story as well. That figure of your vision of putting 100 million onto the sale of specially selected pork and really added to that brand. That's really important for Scotland. It's really important for pig producers, because they can back you because you're backing them. Tell me about that vision. What does it look like? What sort of things are you going to do as a business? What sort of products might we see?
Well, I think that's been developed quite strongly with QMS and the pig farming people, in the knowledge of what volume of pork can actually be bred and produced in Scotland. And then we've gone into certain marketing companies to look at how that value would compare against consumption. And I think the £100 million target sounds quite adventurous, but when you consider the sheer volume of pork and what we mentioned earlier about the variety of pork products, if we can find the smaller chunks in each of those products, then the 100 million is probably still less than 45% of the pork consumption of Scotland. So we're not being over adventurous with it. I think it will take us 3 to 5 year plan to achieve, but if we get the support from the retailers and we can produce the quality products that Browns have been used to for the last 2 decades, I genuinely believe that the consumers in Scotland will take those products on and we will achieve the 100 million.
And you mentioned before that you work very closely with QMS. I know that partnership has been really important to you. What does it bring to you and your business?
I think where Browns have always lacked is that ability to really shine and show the industry what we could do. And I think where QMS have really embraced Browns Food Group in general is to actually take on the points and move those points into products and knowledge, and even like this discussion that we're having today, they're taking us a little bit out of our shell. I would also say a little bit out of our comfort zone. I'll add that to it as well. But it's been fabulous and it's great, and it was great with the farming community. I think they realise that we need a little bit of both sides of it. And then again, from a retail perspective, we've had some great introductory from retails. And the quality systems that go along with that are obviously second to none.
Wayne, we're recording this ahead of the Princess Royal coming to your facilities. What do you hope from that, and what does it mean to you to have her there endorsing what you're doing?
Yeah, that's very exciting, because when we were a very small business, a tenth of what we are today, Princess Anne actually came and opened our new extension in 2001. And it was amazing how involved that she got with the business and her understanding of farming and pork industry. So I'm really excited to see how she feels that progression's gone, because, as I said, we were a very small business and we're tenfold that business now. So I'm excited on being able to show her what we have achieved over that 2 decades.
And what would you like to say to both ends of the chain, to the farmers producing pork, but also to the consumers that are buying pork, about the future?
It's a thank you already for the support that they've given us. We are a quarter of a way down that journey of the 100 million already, which has come together very quickly in the 2-year period. And that has not come without its challenges, both from the farming community side of supporting that matrix and helping us, and then also from the consumers. The work that we've done, they will pick it up. They are very loyal to Scottish produce. They just haven't had the availability of it. So I think if everyone continues the way we have done over the last 2 years, then we will create that successful platform to the 100 million, and everyone will get the benefit of good quality products that are sustainable, that are creating a marketplace in Scotland for all the pigs produced.
And one final question related to the future. Quality Assurance has had a bumpy ride recently because of what's been going on with Red Tractor. But it's absolutely fundamental, isn't it, to giving that assurance to consumers. But what does the specially selected pork assurance mean to your business, and why is it important?
It's a standard which really is second to none. So we have the British standard and the Scottish standard, and to have pork that the consumer fully understands what's gone into the development of that product and the consistency and the security behind it is absolutely essential in today's marketplace. You can't just expect people to pick something up and trust it without a knowledge of what's behind it. And I think the Quality Mark of Scotland absolutely makes that clear to the consumer. So absolutely essential.
What an inspiring story from Wayne there. In next month's podcast, I'll be catching up with Mark Ingram, an award-winning apprentice butcher at Smitty Brothers in Stirling, Sarah Miller about the year ahead, including what's going on at the Highlands Show, and Iain Macdonald for his monthly market insight. Thank you for listening to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. To find out more about QMS's work, head to the news section of the website. You'll also find the latest industry news and links to listen back to previous episodes of the podcast on the QMS website. And for recipe inspiration, go to www.makeitscotch.com or follow on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter. Thank you for listening.